Welcome back to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. Our guest is Douglas C. Brown, radio producer, on-air talent, as well as voiceover talent. And last time Doug was talking about 93 KHJ and the demise of Top 40 radio on AM. And tell us, Doug, about the late 70s program director of KHJ.
When John Sebastian was the program director of KHJ, that must have been in 77, 78, when FM was beginning to make a run for the younger audience. They started testing every song, and they do it over the phone. They'd have, I don't know how they selected the people on the phone, but they'd play these hooks of the songs down the phone line and have people rate them. And say any 30 songs, 2 of them would be new ones, and they were testing them for familiarity or likability and such. So it got very research oriented, so the seat of the pants call, just make the call based on a program director or a music director's call seemed to fade away. It got much more systematic and organized. And the music rotations, they were beginning to use computers to rotate the songs to the day parts and that sort of thing. That was really, I think, what really that kind of thing. And the artists like Sean Cassidy and Debbie Boone are kind of the way that it forced the pop music audience to FMs, because they would play not only, a better, more aesthetic choice of tunes, they'd play, say, the full album versions, not the single edit. And they wouldn't play Debbie Boone and a lot of the disco crap too. There was that whole period where disco was so hot, and it was part of my job as production director to edit a lot of these songs, because many of these disco songs are way too long. You're talking 6 or 7 minutes, and they sound great at midnight on a dance floor, but at 6 o'clock in the morning, or even in 2 in the afternoon, it sounds pretty stupid. So I'd be tasked with cutting down these songs to, say, 3.5 minutes, something like that. I can remember a few of them, like Funky Town by Lips Inc., and some of those disco hits, Knock on Wood by Amy Stewart, cutting those down to something that was tidy. Now, usually the disco hits were so stupid and repetitive, editing them didn't do them any damage. But there were songs that we edited that I think also kind of added up to the demise of AM pop rock radio. For instance, we had a program director in 77, Michael Spears. He was coming out of KFRC, another RKO station in San Francisco, and he made the dictate that none of the songs that he added would be longer than 3 minutes and 35 seconds. Well, it was my job to make them fit, right? So, oh my gosh, I had to cut some records down that just really bugged me. And on top of it, they wanted to play Life in the Fast Lane by the Eagles, but they didn't want him to say a goddamn thing. So I had to edit that for content too, for lyrics. So I'm sure that's part of why KMET, KLOS, KPPC, KROQ, whatever, we're gaining, KROQ FM, that is, we're gaining audience, because the AM stations, in the case of KHJ anyway, was beginning to treat the music with less respect. And I think that changed the flavor of the station. I know when John Sebastian was program director of KHJ, this was in 77, he was trying to take on the audience that was migrating to KMET, for instance. And so he decided he wants to play Kashmir by Led Zeppelin in Afternoon Drive. I'm going, wait a minute. This is not KHJ. I mean, it's one thing to play Dire Maker or, even Whole Lot of Love or something, I suppose. But Kashmir? It's just really a long track. It's like, I don't know, what is it, 8.5, 9 minutes or something?
Good bathroom song.
Yeah, exactly. So it took a long cart, right? It would take just about the maximum length you could put on a cart. So I was doing all the music control. I did all the quality control during all those years in there, especially when we were stereo. It was very important to get all that right. because AM stereo sounded great, actually. KHJ sounded better than the FMs if you had the right tuner. Because Bob Canner was the chief engineer, and he really knew what he was doing. Very talented chief engineer. Anyway, I had loaded up Cashmere on cart, labeled it up, all ready to go, played it back, it was fine. Put it in the air studio. First time they played it, got about 2 minutes in, the cart failed. The cart just quit. This is like cosmic. This is the gods speaking here. Cashmere, like 4:00 in the afternoon, KHJ. That shouldn't be happening. Right? I'll never forget that. And I did not sabotage it. It just died, as 9-minute carts were wont to do. Actually, those longer cartridges. So the evolution of this kind of was interesting to watch. And then when KHJ went country, they actually had blown that too, because they admitted they were doing it months ahead of time. So KZLA, the FM, went stereo country before KHJ could launch. And on top of it, KHJ did this whole jingle package about we all grew up to be cowboys, which was pretty insane. It's one thing to the music, speak for itself. And don't tell the audience that they grew up to be cowboys. I mean, this was, right after the whole urban cowboy thing. And when there was all this crossover music from, Mickey Gilley and all these people crossing over to pop, but still to make your main imaging, we all grew up to be cowboys, I thought was just suicidal.
I think it was interesting. The general manager's name was Neil Rockoff, and that's what he did. He took the rock off KHJ. Yeah.
I had many dealings with him because I actually had some ideas that I tried to float with him, and he would just shut me down. I was an engineer, production technician. I wasn't supposed to have any programming ideas, and it was he was not my favorite guy, but the idea of when I left KHJ to go to KRLA, which was a lot of fun, had a lot of good time there with PD, Jack Roth, and Jim Pewter. But then Greater Media buys the station, so I ended up, looking for another gig. So I found Magic 106, which was the former K-West.
That's right, yeah.
And they should, of course, kept the call sign, because K-West is a classic set of call letters for Southern California. I don't know why the hell they felt the need to do that. But anyway, so Magic 106 was an interesting adventure, because the morning man was Robert W. Morgan. I hadn't worked with Morgan before. Very talented guy, but a very particular guy. Temperament, hard to get along with. And I saw some scenes that I don't want to talk about that I thought were, kind of burst my bubble on the myth of Robert W. Great air talent, great voice, great disc jockey type, and very picky guy, very high standards, and I respect all of that. But I didn't dig working around him all that long, and
I had coworkers who worked with him, and they had difficulty as well. Tom Murphy was good friends with Don Steele, and even though Steele and Morgan were friends, sometimes, like one time Morgan offered, "Hey, Don, come bass fishing with me," and he's like, "No, thank you." And Morgan wouldn't talk to Steele for a couple months, and he told Tom this, and Don said to Tom, "I'm from Hollywood, baby. I don't bass fish." And so maybe a year or two later, Tom said, "I don't get it about Robert. I mean, the guy, he was morning drive by the time he's 28 years old in Los Angeles. He's been a successful DJ, great talent, successful voiceover, making a lot of money. Why is he so miserable?" And Don said, "'Cause he bass fishes, baby."
It's really funny. You remember Lee Baby Sims?
Yeah.
Lee Sims was an inveterate fisherman. He did part-time on KROQ AM way back when, and I'll never forget seeing him bringing in his fishing gear into the studio, And during newscasts, he'd go out into the hallway with his casting rod and actually cast down the hallways with the casting rod. And during most of the records, he'd have a fishing magazine on the console in front of him, and he'd be reading all about fishing. And then it comes time to crack the mic, he'd do his thing and play the next element, and then he's back to the fishing book. I mean, Lee was a real character, but boy, to talk about fishing, he was into it. Anyway, so the thing is, when Magic 106 turned into Power 106, they basically cleaned house and threw everybody out, which was totally expected. I didn't expect to survive that. But very shortly, KKHR FM 93.1 was doing top 40. They were going up against Kiss FM and whoever else at the time, and they needed a production director. So I got hired to work for CBS. Program director there was Scarborough, and he hired me. And within I think it was 2 to 3 weeks of starting at KKHR, they announced they were going to flip the format back to the mellow sound of KNX-FM. And I thought, oh, this is a trip. Now, this is really interesting, because KNX-FM was always my favorite personal station to listen to, because they were very adventurous with music, introducing new artists and deep album tracks, and they weren't dictated by hype or gold records or chart positions. They were just putting together a sound, a very specific sound. And to flash back earlier, when I was production director at KHJ, then in '77, I got word that the KNX-FM was looking for an engineer. All the music was on pre-recorded reel-to-reel tapes, 3 or 4 songs set with back announce burned into it and such. It was all automated, very low-budget operation at Columbia Square. Anyway, so Steve Marshall was the program director over there, so I went over to interview, and Michael Sheehy was the music director. And they gave me a stack of records and some voice tracks and said, turn me loose in the studio and say, crank out this reel. Oh, okay. Well, I was really good at it at that time. So I cranked the thing out and came back and handed the reel to Steve Marshall. And he said, you done already? I said, yeah. So he strings it up and listens to it and offers me a job. But at that point, he could only offer me the swing shift, 3 to midnight. Well, I had a new baby at home, and I wasn't about to, lay that kind of thing on my wife. That it was going to be really disruptive. And on top of it, when I was production director at KHJ, I was getting 15% over scale, so they couldn't meet the money. So I didn't go. So this is 1977. So here I am. Flash forward to now 1986, and they decide they want to revive KNX-FM, and I thought, oh, this is karma. This is perfect. I always wanted to work there, and they're bringing the format back. So I jumped into that whole hog and had a good old time with it. The program director was a guy named Bill Minkler that they had brought in from a very similar station to KNX-FM that was in Portland. I can't remember the call letters now. Anyway, so we did that for a couple of years. It didn't catch on as fast as they had hoped. I think it was because KNX-FM, of course, was an animal of its time. Starting in '73, it was all about the singer-songwriter thing from James Taylor and Carole King and Neil Diamond and on and on. And it evolved over time. But the music scene was not the same anymore by 1986. So I remember we did update the format, adding interesting artists like Clannad and people like that. And there was a lot of, I'm trying to think of some of the artists that we added at the time. Anyway,
so your playlist for the new KNX-FM from 86 to 88 was a lot of the songs from the previous format mixed in with new artists, correct?
Yes, That's right, exactly. In fact, I have a printout of the playlist right here in my file drawer, and it was going very well. The general manager there, this guy named Bob Nelson, he was the CBS vice president and general manager, a really good guy. He was a big champion of the format, and I guess a couple of years in, by '88. They decided that it wasn't working, so I guess they decided to import another CBS manager from another market. So they plugged in another manager who will remain nameless. But I knew about this guy's track record, and I just thought, I don't think I want to work for this guy. So as it turned out, Bob Cantor, the chief engineer back at KRLA, said, I need somebody to come in and fix this music library at KRLA. You want to come over here? I said, okay, fine. So then I walked away from CBS and went to work for KRLA again, right? So I'm there as production director. So I did a lot of promo production and music quality control and all that stuff. At that point, KRLA really sounded dynamite with the between Bob's sophisticated audio processing and my TLC applied to the source material. It really sounded great. In fact, I got to record some fresh Johnny Mann jingles with Johnny Mann, the famous acapellas, a la KHJ. They wanted to cut some fresh ones, and so I got to go to the session and watch Johnny Mann in the studio working, which was really a thrill. But there was some debate about whether we wanted to mix these things in stereo. Well, because there's many tracks of vocals in those things. They're like triple or quadruple tracked of these singers to make them sound large and thick and like that. So we thought, well, let's try stereo mixes. So we tried them at the studio, and it really sounded weirdly less impactful than the straight-ahead mono. So we started doing some remixes, and eventually Johnny Mann just says, here, take the reel. Take the 16 track, take it to the studio, and you mix it. And I said, okay, fine. So I got to be Johnny Mann's mixer for that, and we ended up going basically with just mono. We decided that it just wasn't worth, because we realized that, of course, about half the audience is listening on the table radio anyway, and they're not hearing stereo,
Yeah.
So what's the point? Especially if the stereo isn't spectacular and without any instrumental backing track going on, since they were just clean acapellas. It didn't make a lot of sense to do stereo. But it was interesting because, again, Bob Cantor was the kind of chief engineer that really cared about the overall sound. And he drove an Oldsmobile Cutlass with an AC Delco radio in it, which was at the time probably the most common American car in the market, an Oldsmobile Cutlass with an AC Delco radio in it. So he'd go out to the car. I remember we did this a couple of times, where he'd go out to the car, we'd come into the studio, and I'd do these mixes on the jingles at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning when the audience was small. And Bob would go out and sit in his Cutlass, and we'd play him on the air and within the regular format, so he could listen to him in the Cutlass radio. And then he'd come in and say, well, let's try this. Let's add a little EQ to this or that or whatever. And so I can remember doing that at least twice, and it was really exciting. And it was really cool to have a chief engineer with the technical and the aesthetic wherewithal to actually come into the station at 3 o'clock in the morning and do these on-air tests of the Johnny Mann jingles. So that was part of the KRLA adventure that I thought was really interesting.
And you got Charlie Van Dyke to be the imaging voice, plus they had the top-of-the-hour timpani roll like KHJ had back in the 60s to early 70s.
Yep, that's Hal Blaine on drums, the legendary Hal Blaine. And in fact, it was interesting. I know, were you aware of the KHJ 20-year anniversary thing they did in '85?
I heard about it. Were you there at the event, and what type of involvement did you have in it?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. My friend Jeff Leonard actually put it together with Morgan, and it was really a nice event. Everybody showed up. And so I didn't have a lot of involvement in it. I did supply some material, some promos and air check stuff that I had, but that was really my limit of involvement. But it was really a trip because they arranged to get Johnny Mann to show up with his singers live, and Hal Blaine with his timpani, and they actually did this stuff live on the floor in the ballroom of the hotel. I
wow.
mean, that was magical. You know, it was like, whoa, there's the singers, there's Johnny Mann directing them, doing them live, you know, and especially when they did that classic jingle, "Merry Christmas" from Boss Radio. I mean, that's got to be one of the prettiest a cappella jingles ever, and melodically perfect and great performance. And so just by doing it live was made up for the fact that it wasn't double and triple tracked, but there was the vocalist standing there, you know. It was like, whoa, what a trip this is. This is really cool.
Remember with the KHJ jingles, eventually by about 1973, 74, they still had the jingle sound the same, except you had some mixture of, instrumentals into it. 93 KHJ. Brought into it. Did you have any input in doing that yourself, or is that already done before you came there?
Yeah, and that was funny. When I first arrived in 74, they had just introduced a new jingles package. I think it was out of Pam's in Dallas. And it was really funny to me because to my ear, it sounded like about half the singers were singing G instead of J. To me, when the first time I heard him, it was like 93 KHJ. What? Is it G or J? They obviously stacked the vocals, right? So, it's hard to really tell what was going on. But I always thought those were very strange shotgun jingles. And then, within a short period of time, and TM came up with that whole U package in 76 that sounded like McDonald's commercials, and that was the inspirations. We do it for you, and that started that. Those were syndicated eventually nationally, but they were really developed for KHJ first, and they did have really nice instrumental backings and the typical Dallas singers. Mm-hmm. So they sounded very slick and commercial. So did I have any direct input? No. What I did have direct input on was the Chuck Martin package that he did, the last rock package that we did in 79 at Tuesday Productions down in San Diego.
This is the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. We're talking with radio talent and voiceover artist Doug Brown. Now, next time Doug talks about the imaging voice, the Disney legend that Chuck Martin hired to be one of the imaging voices of 93 KHJ.